Hi everyone, this is Dan, and this is my review of Akira, Book 1 by Katsuhiro Otomo. Akira is an essential manga, I guess is the right way to say it. Influential, definitely, but essential is kind of what I would probably say. Akira was originally published back in 1982, which puts it around the same timeline as Blade Runner. Very interesting. I think the first couple issues of Akira came out before Blade Runner, but you could say that both of them were heavily influenced by science fiction novels of the past decade. What's really fascinating about Akira is primarily the art. The art in Akira is amazing, and it essentially is the seminal manga. So much manga copies Akira in many, many ways, from both the very detailed line art and use of zipatone and shading layers, to the dynamic perspectives and multiple shot storytelling techniques that manga is kind of known for. In particular, action in Akira is almost like the when you read through Akira, the way that action is shown visually is almost the textbook way that manga does action in most of the issues out there that you see. This particular volume or book of Akira that I'm about to review is the first one, published by Dark Horse Comics. There's another version of Akira, which is really the more historical version of Akira, that was printed by Epic Comics, which is an imprint of Marvel Comics. And it's very rare, and I really wish I had it because it's the colored version of Akira, so the overall quality is a lot better. This version by Dark Horse, while Dark Horse claims it's more, I guess, traditional to what the Japanese expect, I kind of don't like it compared to the few copies of the Epic version from Marvel that I've seen. Probably the biggest thing that I don't like about it is, again, you pay a lot of money for a book paid on, or printed on really cheap paper. What I loved about the American version is it kind of took manga in the opposite direction, printing it on very nice paper with full coloring. Really, really nice. They're very rare, hard to find. If you find one, keep it. They're worth a lot of money. One thing I will note, though, is this book reads left to right, which is kind of interesting. The other thing that I did want to also note is that Otomo's use of dialogue balloons is also very influential and in many ways inspires a lot of manga that came after it. Otomo uses basically a lot of panels that have just almost single word or few word dialogue balloons back and forth. It ends up making your eyes kind of read through the panels and the pages very quickly. That and the unique visual storytelling that Otomo uses makes Akira a really good page turner. It's very, very common to just burn through Akira, and honestly manga in general, very quickly. You'll go through a big book of these things that normally, if it was like an American or a French comic, would take you a while. And that has kind of been sort of the trademark of manga to a degree. The other thing, Akira wasn't the first to do this, but again, Akira contains the common manga trope of using exaggerated and interesting expressions on people's faces to get across emotions and really the feeling of the story. Akira, I would be, kind of stupid to not mention that Akira is sort of the godfather of Japanese cyberpunk, and really is probably one of the precursors in general for cyberpunk around the world. I think it just kind of missed Blade Runner and many other things, and you could say that cyberpunk in general is just a bunch of people that were inspired by Mobius's drawings from Heavy Metal magazine. But Akira's cyberpunk setting becomes almost like a trope for many Japanese manga for years to come. So many Japanese manga steal from Akira that after a while it almost becomes boring when you see a cyberpunk manga, because you're like sitting here like, I wonder how many things this manga will steal from Akira. Another thing Akira has as far as manga tropes is the tropes of schools and gangs. In particular, book 1 of Akira right here, you get to meet Kaneda, who is the protagonist of the story, and his gang of delinquents, which includes Tetsuo, who is the antagonist of Akira, and you kind of run into them in the school setting, which is sort of a unique thing that the Japanese do. Japanese schools are very different from Western schools, and if you've ever read, or watched any, anime, for the most part, you will see the Japanese school as a common setting. Another thing that is also common is the use of gangs and groups. In this case, the biker gangs that you see in this first book here in Akira. The other aspect of Akira that I personally like a lot is the mystery aspect. Especially in the first book, you don't really know what the hell Akira is. You only get this very ominous image of something trapped deep in the earth in the first book. And it really gets you jazzed as far as oh wow, what's coming up next. It's a really great use of mystery and tension in Akira by Otomo to get you going through the book. Now, let me talk about the negatives of Akira. And let me be clear, I like Akira and I think it's a good manga, but there's a few things I'd like to point out, especially in this first book. Kaneda in the first book, especially the manga, not so much the anime. Keep that in mind. The anime and the manga are a little, they're actually pretty heavily different from each other. Kaneda is really unlikable in the first book here. And I do remember it gets a little better in later books, but when I was rereading Akira Book 1, I was like, wow, I really don't like this guy. It's very different from other manga protagonists that are sort of anti-heroes. Like a good example is, say, Ichigo from Bleach. He's a bit of a prick, but at the end of the day, he does heroic and good things. Even Guts from Berserk, even though he does a lot of morally questionable things, he still does heroic things. In Akira Book 1, Tetsuo, which is the name of the book, honestly, Kaneda barely does anything heroic. He's kind of a piece of shit. And I know it changes later on in the series, but I'm somewhat, I look back on it and I'm just like, man, this is really bad storytelling if you think about it. That Otomo really doesn't do a good job of getting you hooked on Kaneda in the first couple books. And if you think about it, Akira was serialized for quite a while, so many of the Japanese readers had to keep reading for a long time to really get a payoff with this character. I mean, even Tetsuo, the, antagonist, it's not really explained very well in the first several hundred pages of Akira as far as, what is the relationship between him and Kaneda. But just looking at Book 1 by itself, and Book 1 I got it right here in my hand. It's a big freaking book. In the name of decompressed visual storytelling, a lot of characterization and exposition was kind of sacrificed, and I think that's unfortunate. The other thing that I do want to mention is that even though the art is extremely influential, you start to see sort of the backdraws and the weaknesses of the manga art form. Mainly that a lot of weak line art that Otomo does gets kind of covered up by the use of gray shading layers and zipatone. And this becomes almost a trope in and of itself of manga. And that is almost 90 to 100% of manga is all, ink line arts with zipatone and gray shading layers. And in some ways, the line arts sometimes aren't even that creative. Now, there are exceptions to that. Obviously, the artist for One Punch Man, and he also did Eye Shield 21, Kentaro Miura, the artist for Berserk. They have very advanced inking techniques that rival even the best of Western artists. But you start to see in later mangas almost, I would say, a saturation of the use of kind of cheap line art with zipatone and gray shading layers. So Akira was kind of the trailblazer in both creating it and also, unfortunately, kind of making it the trope of manga that this is kind of what is expected of that art form. It's not bad, I still love manga, but I get a little tired sometimes. So overall, what do I think of Akira? I like it. I've sometimes it sounds like I might be trashing on it. I don't. I have a heavy respect for Akira. I think just for me personally, when all I hear is Akira, I'm like, there's other really great manga. Now, if you're arguing great cyberpunk manga, yeah, I would see why Akira would be number one, just because pretty much every Japanese cyberpunk manga afterwards is either a ripoff of Akira, or a ripoff of Blade Runner, or a ripoff of Mobius, Blade Runner, and Akira. But I like Akira. I think it's a great manga. I would recommend it to anyone. I freaking wish to God the Epic Comic printing of this was easily available, just because it's so rare to find manga colored that I would just love it to just read through and see what a Western colorist would interpret from the manga. It's just so rare to find colored manga, and don't get me wrong, manga's fine being black and white and printed on the cheapest fucking paper with shitloads of gray shading and zipatone. But man, just once, I would just love to see just really beautiful Western colors on top of manga. But you know, it is what it is. Anyhow, yeah, let's get to the art real quick here. So here I'm showing 2 panels from Akira Book 1. Top panel is Kaneda, single point perspective, riding his crotch rocket straight ahead. The bottom panel is Tetsuo, again, single point perspective, riding his, I think it's sort of like a chopper or some sort of naked bike, straight ahead. One thing I tried to focus on right here is just keeping the forms clean. So I'm always at a disadvantage. Like, even though manga's black and white, as I said before, there's a heavy use of shading layers and zipatone, and I can't really do that with pen and ink. You'd usually do that digitally or through some sort of other process by another person later. So in this case, I kind of try to spot my blacks. I know, and that phrase gets overused a lot here and there. And one thing I definitely did is for the speed lines, it's technically a inverted speed lines in the original artwork. And so it's a black background with white lines coming out. I didn't really feel this was necessary. I thought the just regular speed lines would get the point across anyway, other than to suggest that it's at nighttime, and it is at nighttime when this chase scene is going on. Other than that, always happy to do manga art, mainly because, and it seems crazy, but this was actually really, like, to me, this was fairly easy to do, especially compared to a lot of, say, the French artists or some of the American comic book artists. This was actually kind of fun to do, and I always have fun doing manga, other than Kentaro Miura. He's kind of brutal. Anyhow, that's the review. Let me know what you think. If you like the review, please hit the thumbs up to like it. Subscribe if you haven't subscribed. Hit the bell for notifications. If you got any comments about this review or the artwork, leave it down below, and I will see you next time.